Hello folks, welcome to Outdoors with Bud. I'm your host, Bud Fields. First of all, we want to acknowledge the Legacy Barn just west of Kokomo. They're allowing us to use their facility, so we're going to shoot our segments here today. We're right in the middle of our Indiana archery deer season, so what I wanted to do today was kind of talk to you folks about arrows. And when I started deer hunting and shooting archery in 1964, basically the only option that we had for arrow shafts was Port Orford cedar. Of course, that's a wood. And then there was some fiberglass materials available. And if you was one of the top dog target shooters, you preferred aluminum arrows. Well, you don't find very many of the wood arrows available anymore, but it used to be that you could go into any of the department stores if they had a sporting goods department, and most of them had archery equipment. Well, you could go back and you could buy a wooden arrow. Now, back in those days, now I've got some arrows here with me. For instance, this is a wooden shaft. They were rather inexpensive. You could buy a completely made arrow that was fletched with the shaft and with a point on it. You could buy those in the sporting goods department anywhere from about 59 cents to under $1 a piece. Now, today, you can't hardly find wooden arrows. They were very affordable, and you could buy them just about any place. You could buy them in about 28-inch length, 30-inch length, up to 32 inches. Now, most of them had a diameter of 5/16 diameter up to 11/32, depending on the poundage of the bow. Now, the normal average archer at that time had a 28-inch draw length. So a lot of the arrows were 28-inch. Some of them were 30, some of them were 32, depending, but they had them size marked. Now, one of the advantages of a wooden arrow was Port Orford cedar was a little higher grade wood than some of your cheaper ones, but they had a tendency to warp. And you could buy 12 wooden arrows, and if you had a grain scale, if you weighed each and every one of those, you would be lucky if you had 3 arrows that weighed the exact same amount of grains. And back in those days, the tournament archer was the guys that was more concerned because they were shooting for money, they were shooting for awards and trophies. But the bow hunter, they just wanted arrows to go out and shoot and hunt deer or turkeys or whatever. But wood was one of the most popular ones. Well, then they also had a fiberglass arrow. Fiberglass was extremely durable, but they were heavy. Now, they all weighed pretty much the same amount as grains on the scale compared to what the Port Orford cedar shafts were, but they were so heavy in weight that you lost a lot of your speed, your arrow speed, foot per second. Now, there again, the bow hunter didn't care so much about it because the advantage of that heavier arrow was kinetic energy, impact power. An arrow does not harvest a deer or an animal by shock as a bullet. A bullet will kill by shock, and it also takes life by hemorrhage and shock. An arrow does not expand, and it does have a little bit of shock, but it takes an animal by hemorrhaging, by cutting. You're basically shooting like a knife blade when you're shooting at the deer. But they came out with what they called a microflight arrow. That was a hollow, about like a straw. Had the middle of it was hollow, just like blowing the air through a straw, which made it lighter weight. And the microflight was extremely durable, and they didn't break very easy. I hadn't used microflight arrows for several years, and I shot maybe 5 or 6 deer with the same exact arrow. I just resharpened the broadhead and took deer with that. But aluminum arrow was by far the most popular. Now, they were a little more pricey, but the thing about aluminum arrow, you could buy a dozen aluminum arrows, and each and every one of those would be precisely the same amount of grains. Now, aluminum would bend. And if you were proficient enough and skilled enough with with an arrow straightener, you could re-straighten them. Now, what you had to watch with the aluminum arrows were some of them, they had several different grades of aluminum arrows. Sometimes they would develop a crack. And I used to have a little magnifying glass that had a button with a battery, and it had a little light on it. I would check my arrows and make sure there was no cracks. If there was a crack, I would discard that right away. But modern day hunters like to use graphite. Graphite is much more expensive, but they're extremely durable. They do not bend. I've had arrows that I've taken, nice sized deer, that actually fell over on top of that arrow. And a lot of times that arrow, you could just clean it off, resharpen the broadhead, or replace that broadhead, and you could take another deer with it. And carbon is by far the most popular way to hunt now. Now, the composition of an arrow, I'm going to show you right here as soon as I'll get one of my carbon arrows. The main part of the arrow body is referred to as the arrow shaft. All right. Then they had some type of fletching. Fletching, in some days, years ago, they used feathers for fletching. The purpose of the fletching is just like the steering wheel on your car. The fletching actually guided the arrow in flight, because as it's going, it's actually coming out of that bow at such force that if the fletching is not the right size or a good quality fletching, you're not going to get accurate arrow flight. Then another part of the arrow is, of course, the arrow head. Now, on this wooden arrow, I don't know how well you can see this, but this looks almost like a bullet. This is a target point. This is designed more or less for target shooting, like maybe in your straw bales or your hay bale in your backyard. Now, I do know some guys that's groundhog hunted with this type of a point, but it's not sharp, it's bullet shaped, it's very, very aerodynamic, and you can get pretty good flight. Now, this particular arrow here is a carbon arrow, and this fletching is actually made by feathers. You can see I can bend that down. Now, if you went to refletch your own arrows, this is basically the way you could buy a full-length feather. This is a turkey feather. Now, if you ever looked inside of an electric toaster when you're toasting, you see it like a real hot red wire, reddish orange wire in there. We would cut these feathers, like if, for instance, this is a 4-inch feather. This is a 2-inch plastic vein, but you could cut the length that you wanted. You just measured it, you took a scissor and you cut it, then you put it on the arrow, you glued it onto the arrow shaft, and then you plugged that electric feather burner in, and then you rotated that arrow, and it cut it. Well, they had this is referred to as a parabolic. It comes up and it's rounded at the back. Now I'm going to show you another arrow that this is a plastic vein. This is a shield. It comes up in the air, down, and it curves back in. And the main part of that is basically just for stability and arrow flight. Well, then on the end, where it goes onto your bowstring, there was always a plastic knock. You can see it slotted. Your bowstring, that you just slid that onto your bowstring, then you pulled the string back, and then you could shoot it. Now, another thing that this is a carbon shaft right here. This is the way they come to you if you're going to build your own. They're hollow, just like looking down through a straw. There's a little brass or aluminum bushing that you simply install. It just goes in. Now this one already has a bushing in it, and this is the one that goes in the opposite end. All you do is line it up, and you put some kind of a super glue or a heat type glue, and you heat it up. Then you push it in. That way, you can change your points. Let me see here. Here's an arrow. It's got the bushing in it. Now here's a field point, and this is threaded at the end. All you do is stick it in that bushing, and you just simply screw that in. Usually finger tight's all that you need. and then you could go out in your yard and you could shoot with that field point. Then if you was wanting to go hunting, you could simply unscrew that, and then all you had to do was just simply take your hunting point, put that in there, and it's the same thread. Then you just simply screwed that down. That way you've got your same arrow, you just change your point on it, now you're ready to go hunting. Now in most cases, guys ask me which is the better, the feathers or the plastic vanes. The feathers, here's probably an arrow that very few people have ever seen. This has got huge fletching on it. This is a flu arrow. This arrow is designed to shoot fast, but not very far. A lot of guys use these for shooting turkey. A lot of them use them for duck hunting. You can shoot squirrels or rabbits on the ground. That way, like if you missed the target, that arrow didn't careen and go out through the woods or through the high grass, and you're not going to be able to find it. In my opinion, years ago, if you were shooting like with your fingers on your bowstring, if you got a bad release, if you were shooting feathers, the feathers were a little more forgiving on the shooting form breakdown. But the thing about these plastic vanes, if you're hunting in the rain and these feathers get wet, they start collapsing. Well, that's taking a lot of your stability and your flight characteristic off that arrow, so it's not going to fly as good. A plastic vane, you can be out in the rain, you could be out in the snow, and if that gets wet, it's not going to collapse. They're very durable. Now this vane here, I'm going to take it and I'm going to twist it just to give you an idea. Okay, you see how badly twisted that is? I can let go of that and it's going to come back to the perfect shape. There it is, just like it was when I first showed you. But a lot of it's personal choice. You can buy your plastic vanes in 2-inch, 3-inch, 4, and 5-inch. Now, which do you need? You cannot really find very many wood arrows anymore. Aluminum arrows are still a very popular commodity for the archer and the bow hunter, but the graphite will probably cost you twice as much or 2.5 times as much as the aluminum arrow, but you're going to be able to use it. I've got a couple arrows. Well, I don't have any of them with me at this time, but I've shot like 5 or 6 deer with that same arrow. Now, eventually, you're going to have to refletch them. The feathers or the vanes will go away. But the only thing that you're actually going to damage or can damage a plastic vane is intense heat. Now, I mean, like if it's 80 or 90 degrees out and you're shooting targets, that type of heat's not going to bother it. But if you're near a fire or if you put a cigarette lighter up there and intentionally try to burn that, you can do it. Now, the main thing about an arrow is they got to be straight to get accurate arrow flight, okay? Your points have to match. They have to be in good shape. Now, how do you know if your arrow is crooked? I've got a little device here that I can put my arrow on, and it's got little wheels on it, and they see that spinning very well? Okay, now this table's a little bit wobbly, but if that arrow is bent, now when I'm doing this, that arrow is rotating, but it's not hopping up and down. If it was bent, it would you could actually see it. But if you concentrate like right here where the feathers are, you can see how fast that's rotating. That's not jumping up and down. That's just going right. And you can roll that down. And what I've got a little thing that I made that I can put on this. And where this point is, I can rotate that, and if it's bent any at all, I can see that point go out around. Now, which do I really recommend? I recommend buying the best equipment that you can afford. It might cost you a little bit more money, but it's going to be more durable. Now, if you're a beginning bow hunter, or if you've got a kid that's getting started, I don't really recommend going out and buying them the graphite, because they are quite expensive, and I think you might be better off maybe trying to find some of the aluminum arrows. I mean, anymore, it's not unusual. Just for example, this, you're going to notice that this arrow here is much shorter than the one with the flu arrow. This is what they call a bolt, B-O-L-T, just like a screw and a bolt. These are normally shorter because this is what comes out of a crossbow. You shoot the shorter arrow out of the crossbow. Now I don't know whether or not you want to start your kid using a compound bow. A compound bow is a little more critical, and it's got to be set up, and unless you know what you're doing, I usually start a kid out on a recurve, a lightweight recurve that they can shoot good. But the better equipment that you can get, the better off you're going to be when you're hunting. Now, whether you use feathers, whether you use vanes is personal choice. I prefer using the vanes because I hunt in all kind of weather. I usually start out in October when it's fairly warm, and you get a lot of rain normally in October. Then the colder it gets and you get more rain coming in, the vanes, you don't have to worry so much about your arrow flight being hampered due to them falling. But I recommend, if at all possible, you can buy arrows and stuff at your local box stores like Walmart's, and of course there's not very many Kmart's around anymore. But I suggest going to a place just like say Dick's Sporting Goods or Dunham's that's got archery equipment in there. And a lot of times you go to a place like that, the guy behind the counter knows what he's doing. Or if you can find a local archery shop, I always say promote the mom and pop stores. Because normally you can go into a certified archery shop, archery pro shop, and the guy behind the counter, he knows what he's talking about. He can get you set up. And if your equipment is set up to fit you and your equipment is tuned, you're going to be surprised at the accuracy and the results you're going to get in enjoying target archery and bow hunting. So folks, I hope that information has helped you. In a future segment, I'm going to make an effort to be able to show you how you go ahead and you make an arrow, how you cut the length on them, how you put new feathers on them. It's not really hard, and the more you do it, of course, the easier it gets. And there's just something about taking an animal or winning the trophy with equipment that you've made yourself. So I want to thank you for joining me today. Get out there and shoot your bow. Get your kids started. Wives sometimes like it too. So thank you again for joining Outdoors with Bud. We'll see you down the road. Thank you.